Gators Breakdown episode 86 is ready to go. Game 1, week 1 is finally here. The big game versus Michigan's this Saturday, and we'll give you the keys to victory for the Gators versus Michigan. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And joining me tonight is Joe Vizzi. You can find Joe on Twitter at JoeV_GatorsPod, and Bill Sykes on Twitter at RealBSykes. Guys, it's finally here.
I'm ready to talk some football, and I mean real football, finally.
You know, the boxing match was on Saturday night, but the real heavyweight fight is tonight between me and Bill, and I'm going to knock him out in the first round.
What are we fighting over?
Or should I do the McGregor? I'm going to knock him out inside of 3 rounds.
Yeah, you saw how that worked out.
We don't even know what they're going to fight about, but we're pretty sure they'll disagree about something tonight. So it will happen somewhere along the way. If it doesn't, that'll be a surprise. Before we dive in here, remember you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just get all those past episodes there. Not too dated right now before the big game, so last few weeks we've got some good episodes there. So just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Also, when on iTunes, rate and review the show. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. Guys, we'll talk some keys to victory and what Florida needs to do to beat Michigan. Of course, we still don't know a starting quarterback. Jim McElwain had his press conference today. We didn't really expect the starter to be named, so, no surprise there. But for a top key for Florida beating Michigan is, we know, of course, it's kind of common sense right now, but getting good quarterback play. Jim McElwain will probably choose between Luke Del Rio and Feleipe Franks. We know they bring different skill sets to the table, but the playbook doesn't necessarily change all that much between those guys. I'm sure there are certain throws both can hit better than the other, so that might affect some play calling. But it's not like we're getting zone read with Franks, even though he's much more mobile than Del Rio. I think you can see some of that, but most of it will be reserved for when we see Zaire behind center. That's when he's behind center, that's probably when we'll get a lot more of those design run plays. But with whoever his name started between Franks and Del Rio, do you guys see a difference in how Jim McElwain attacks the Michigan defense? Start with you, Joe.
With either of those guys, not really, because they're both pass-first quarterbacks. I mean, neither one of them are running quarterbacks. We know, Franks can move a little bit. We saw it in the spring game. We saw it when he was in high school. So as far as the game plan, if either of those two are named the starter, absolutely not. Nothing changes. I think the play calling's the same. Obviously Del Rio's arm isn't as strong as Frank's, so you might see some more downfield plays. A lot more big game breaker type plays with Frank's arm. But as far as the play calling, I think those two are very similar in their skill sets. Obviously, we all hope that Franks is better than Del Rio, but as far as skill set wise, I think they're both very similar, and I think the playbook it will remain the same for either of those two. Now, like you said, David, with Zaire, things change up a little bit. You get some read option in there. Zaire's obviously going to use his legs, and he's going to throw a little bit. So you definitely attack the defense in a different way. And just as McElwain's been saying for the last couple of weeks, each quarterback kind of brings his own skill set to the table when it comes to playing quarterback. So, but I think obviously the biggest difference is Zaire to the other two. I don't think it's much of a difference between Del Rio and Franks.
Before we get there, Joe, what's your one key for what do you want to see from the quarterback position in and of itself against this Michigan defense?
Consistency. That's one thing. Even when the quarterback play has been good the last couple years, I mean, whether it was Greer, Treon Harris looked good at times, Del Rio looked good at times last year, obviously. Appleby had a few good series, games, whatever you want to call it, but nothing was consistent. Del Rio would have a great game, and then, we saw how he looked against Georgia, and he looked against Arkansas. And, he was injured, that's what McElwain said, but still, he didn't even look that great against Georgia. When he did come back. Appleby looked good in the first half of Tennessee and completely looked like a Purdue transfer in the second half of Tennessee. So, The same with Greer. Greer had a great game against Ole Miss, and he didn't play very good against Kentucky. So, Treon Harris, same thing. He had a great game against LSU, even though Florida lost that game. But then he put up a couple stinkers. So, it's just a completely – I just want consistency. That's what I'm looking for. I want the quarterback, whoever it's going to be, to play good for the entire game. I don't want us, I don't want the offense to look great for a series, and then the next series it's just 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, fumble, incompletion, turnover. That's one thing I don't want to see. For
sure. Bill, I mean, watching this Michigan defense, we know the strengths in the front seven. How does the quarterback position in and of itself? What's the key for more likely you say is probably Franks or Del Rio. Zaire will definitely get some playing time. I think we know that. But who gets to start still yet to be determined. How did they attack it, Bill?
Well, at the risk of overemphasizing the differences between Franks and Del Rio, I do think there's a couple differences in the way they can attack between those two, even as pass-first quarterbacks. Patrick Smith at Pat the Fat 1995 said that he thinks if Feleipe Franks starts, he'll have a great game with a lot of downfield shots. And I think that that's very possible. I think Franks has got the biggest arm of the three quarterbacks, and I think that they might really try to establish the run game. And as a matter of fact, I would say he might be the quarterback of the three that's going to be most dependent on a successful establishment of the run game, because I think he can thrive in play action situations. I think they will call some deep strikes for him. Hopefully he can show the accuracy on the seam routes between the zones if they are in that. I think one thing to look for with him is maybe like smash routes smash concepts where you have a corner route and they try to pick on 1v1 looks with the young secondary of Michigan. Whereas Luke Del Rio, he is the guy that is the most familiar with Mac's offense. He's the guy that I expect to be the most efficient at the line adjustments, at check downs, to be more methodical, taking what the defense gives him, dinks and dunks. I think something to look for with him would be like a mesh concept and pick routes where they're trying to get these Kadarius Tonys and Dre Massey's in the slots of the world, and then the other receivers open in space as they're coming across and breaking free into the zones. So I think maybe he's the guy that's going to be more efficient at working the shallow game. And look for the yard after catch from those receptions. Whereas Malik Zaire, Jamel Lee at Gator Glory 09 says that he thinks if Zaire starts, it'll add an element where it'll really hurt Michigan in the running game. And the thing with him, we've talked about how he can be bring a read option element to the game, but I wanted to point out that could impact this game in three ways. Number one, if Zaire is successful in the establishment of this read option, it allows them to not block one of these great defensive linemen from Michigan. Mm-hmm. You don't have to block a read option defender because you're keying off that guy, and if he runs one way, you go the other. So that helps them neutralize one of those four on those plays. Number two, we're going to talk a little bit tonight about Don Brown's Viper back. It's one of, Alabama has their Jack linebacker, and you hear about the Buck, and theirs is the Viper, and he's more of a linebacker DB hybrid. If Zaire's successful running the football, and if this read option game gets going, they're going to have to bring that Viper down as a third linebacker, not sit back in their nickel looks or their 4-2-5 looks. And it's going to put Florida's passing game in better situation numbers-wise between the wide receivers and the secondary to take 1v1 strikes against those young defenders again. And number three, it's going to command additional attention inside the box. So that could free up the perimeter plays, screen passes, outside runs, things of that nature. So I do think Zaire is going to be a part of the attack at some point. And if he's not, you got to think Tony might take a few of those snaps. And I think it's going to be important because it can help him schematically. But there are differences as well, three.
Yeah, and going to what you got. Oh, yeah. Well, go ahead, Joey. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say on the defensive backs side, Bill, Michigan's defensive backs have 0 starts among any of them. Lavert Hill, David Long are both sophomores at the cornerback position. Josh Metellus is a sophomore, and Tyree Kinnell is the oldest one. He's the free safety. He's a junior this year. They are very, very young on the back end, Bill, and I really, really think that this is a game where a guy like Franks, who is a true freshman, a redshirt freshman, starting his first game, can really kind of maybe not have complicated looks with guys that are inexperienced and kind of get himself going. So I did want to point that out to you.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just going to be a matter of, like I said, getting the one-on-one looks back there. If they're throwing into a disadvantage numbers-wise, it's going to be hard, and it could be one of the absolute keys to this game. So whenever Dave's ready, we'll talk about that as well, but that's definitely something we need to discuss tonight.
Yeah, for sure. And, going through, both of you guys said it, Luke Del Rio is probably the more safe option, but Franks is the big play option. That's one reason that I shy away from Del Rio and go more towards Franks. I'm not so sure Del Rio can come out and lead drive after drive against this Michigan defense. And, yeah, they're young, but they're still bringing back some guys who played a good bit of ball last year. And Don Brown, the defensive coordinator, he'll be ready. He'll have something there. And I'm just not so sure we can keep the dink and dunk going and expect to drive down the field time after time again on this Michigan defense. If your defense is playing well, okay, you take your chances with that. But if it's if you're looking at Michigan having 20 points or so with their offense, I really think you can probably use the big playability of Franks to take advantage of there. I just don't think you'll be able to use short yardage plays and march down the field on Michigan. So. And maybe what opens this up a little bit, my key is letting this quarterback and trusting these quarterbacks early. We've seen McElwain, especially last year against tough defenses in FSU and Bama, let Appleby come out and throw it. These games, they march right down the field. I think, you have to do that again with the passing. It wasn't a lot of dink and dunk. There were some chunk yards there with the passing game. Let's see how Michigan with their young secondary if you start getting some plays off and start getting their confidence down a little bit early. I still have my doubts about how the offensive line could run block against this Michigan front. So if you come out slinging it and then load that box early, I think it gets some these quarterbacks some confidence, especially Franks as the starter. If this young guy can come in and get some plays early and get his confidence up, and then maybe he can ride that to bigger things. We know he has a cannon to launch balls for big games, but he has to. If he hits one of those early, I think it sends a message to everyone in the stadium that he's ready to play. Now we'll have to back it up after that, but get him comfortable as fast as you can, and the same for Del Rio in a way. We know the terrible starts he had last year against Georgia and Arkansas, like Joe said. So can he get off to a fast start if he's a start to help ease his mind and not fall into the trap of here we go again. So my key from the quarterback position is get a fast start, let him throw early, and hopefully it's successful and confidence builds from there.
Yeah, look, we don't know what we've got at quarterback here yet. But at this point, I'm far less concerned about that because it is what it is. I'm much more concerned about putting them in a situation where they can thrive in this game. And I'm telling you right now, Michigan is going to want to come out, I think, on first and second downs, 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, anything that's not an obvious rundown on those first two downs. I think they're going to try to let their defensive line control the football game. I think they're going to have 4 down linemen. I think sometimes they're going to run 2 linebackers, sometimes walk that Viper back. It's Kaliki Hudson, I think, is going to play for them. Yeah. But for the most time, to start the game, unless they want to throw an early wrinkle, I think they're going to try to put 6 in the box. Florida has to make them pay. If they can't make them pay, then you're asking your quarterback to not only fend off some great pass rushers, but to throw into a disadvantage in the numbers game. You don't want that. They want to keep – they've got young defensive backs. They're going to try to keep a too high safety look a lot of times, and I think try to keep these receivers from Florida in front of them, and like you said, make Florida drive down the field and sustain long drives. They want to eliminate the big play. If Florida can instead establish the run game, if they can make them pay and draw that 7th defender into the box, then you've got 1 versus 1 on these young defensive backs who have very little playing time experience. They'll have a lot less safety help, and that's when a guy like Franks can feast. That's what's got to happen in this football game for Florida to win.
Joe, we'll move on now from the quarterbacks a little bit. We still have some, of course, they're relatable to the other positions. But, what are you looking for in offense that Florida can use an advantage over this Michigan defense?
Wide receivers. We talked about how deep they are and, repeatedly over and over again. And, when you got guys that are I think Michigan's defensive backs are you got one guy who's 5'11" starting, Lavert Hill. You got David Long, who's 5'11". You got Josh Metellus, who's 6 foot, and Tyree Cannell, who is 5'11", Bill. Just those heights alone put Michigan at a huge disadvantage as far as just size. You guys got guys like Swain, 6'2", Hammond 6'2", Cleveland 6'3", 6'4". These are guys that can get up over these small DBs and make plays, and that's the big disadvantage that Florida has on Michigan's defense. I think, like David said, you got to throw early and often on Michigan and see, you got to make them pay. And then it's kind of the opposite. You got to open up the passing game to open up the running game. With Michigan, I think just because the strength of their team is their front four, not even their front four, Bill. I would argue their front six, front seven. Michigan returns Mike McCray. He's a senior linebacker, their weak side linebacker. He's their second leading tackler from last season. Bill, they only returned three people from their top 10 tacklers last year, and Mike McCray is one of them. He's their second leading tackler from last year at the weak side linebacker. So they got some talent in the linebacking core too. So I think you do have to throw the ball on this defense early.
I agree with it that you're going to have to establish the pass, but you've got to throw into good looks. And if they are coming out of in the nickel, because that's basically what it is. If they've got their Viper back as a fifth DB, it's a nickel look. And if you're out there with a tight end and, I don't know, man, if you got a run formation and they're not respecting that, you have to establish it. But you did key on something that I think is important. This is not a typical Big Ten defense. This is not a bunch of big lumbering Nordic guys out here like Vikings. Maurice Hurst, their star defensive tackle, who was a reserve last year, but who a lot of people view as one of the top defensive linemen in America, in the top three maybe. He's only like a 6'2", 280 defensive tackle. His advantage is in his lateral quickness. He's a guy that scrapes and bounces all around after first contact, sheds blocks. He's deadly on the twists and stunts. He's going to move all around and cause chaos in the passing game and the running game. But to me, as much as I want to see Florida thrive with the passing game, and as much as it's been a long time coming, I want Florida to run right at these guys. I'm talking about power looks, A gap, B gap runs. If you want to neutralize a guy that's running around blocks, run right at him. And whether that be through letting Scarlett hand him the ball and him just plow ahead. And if you put Hege and McCoy on this guy and try to drive him off the ball, or if you are running the read option looks, you've got to command that they bring people up to respect the running game. We can't ask Franks to hit deep routes against man coverage with two safeties to help. I just think it's a lot to ask. I think they've got to establish the run first.
I can see that. It's just I have my doubts that they can do it. I mean, I know we're higher on this offensive line than we have been in the past, but this front seven, and like Joey said, front six, front seven, they scare me here. I mean, they really do with what I've seen with this Florida offensive line. Look, if Florida comes out and this is the second half of the LSU game all over again where they're pissed off and fire off the ball, okay, then go all for it. But I have my reservations this can happen early in the game. So maybe that's kind of why I lean hopefully. But Bill, you're right. I mean, it's according to how Michigan lines up of how they do this, and they probably will see if Florida can just run against a normal front before they start bringing people up. But it's just I have my doubts that they can get it done. And it's not anything with Jordan Scarlett. I just have to see this offensive line prove it before I can see it. Even with Alabama game last year, I know I keep going back to that game, but Appleby, those first couple of drives, the passes were there and the pass blocking was there. Surprisingly, Bama could not get in the backfield, but of course, just the run game was just not there. It was non-existent. I don't want to say that's probably what we'll see again, but this front seven for Michigan, I believe is just. I will have to see Florida's offensive line do it before I believe they can do it.
David, the whole first quarter against Alabama, Florida was the better team. Florida beat Alabama at every phase of the game for the entire first quarter. And we're talking offense and defense. So, the play calling is there, like you said, David. I mean, we can go back and look at game tape from the last two seasons with Doug Nussmeier, and there were games where receivers were running wide open. I mean, look at the Florida State game last year in Tallahassee. I mean, Austin Appleby missed some big-time wide-open receivers. I mean, the plays are there. The plays are there. Just got to execute, and that's why I said consistency, David.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, I do agree with you guys. All I'm saying is it starts with the offensive line, and that's why I said that. It doesn't matter how good the quarterback is. If Franks is the next Joe Montana, if we let these front four harass Franks, harass Del Rio, harass Zaire, it's not going to matter. And that does extend obviously to the pass blocking schemes as much as it does to establishing the runs. And I guess that's what I'm getting at as much as anything is this offensive line to me is the unit to watch in this football game. If Florida's going to win, it's because they take that next step. TJ McCoy, I know I've had some disagreements about how far he's come, and with some people, and we got to see Martez Ivy's health. I want to see it. Fred Johnson slid in at guard. Can he get leverage on this 6'2", 280 defensive tackle that's quick? They got to make it happen. If Florida's going to take the next step under Jim McElwain, it starts here and it starts in the trenches.
Yeah. Any other thing we look for on offense, guys? I mean, one thing I want to say is, Bill, you said establish the run, and I think ways Florida may establish the run is maybe not run right at Michigan. Keep them off balance. Keep them guessing. Run Tony and Massey and Powell on some sweeps and reverses, and bring Zaire in. Tony may be in the backfield as well. Run some read options, some zone option plays. I don't necessarily think you have to run right at them. I think keep them off balance. East-west a little bit. I know you don't want to do that a whole lot, but maybe come out a little creative in the run game. When Florida had red zone trouble last year, I go back to the Georgia game last year where they ran Callaway on a little reverse and it was an easy touchdown. Something they haven't done a whole lot of. But I think with this front against Michigan, I think you have to look for creative ways to get the offense going. We've seen this offense struggle against some big time defenses, and this is a big time defense. Get them guessing even more. There's some new guys on that defense for Michigan. Keep them thinking. Don't let them react late. Don't let them just be able to. Don't let them dictate what you do on offense. You need to dictate what they do on defense.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And, being a good defensive line and being a disciplined defensive line go hand in hand, but they don't always coexist. And so if McElwain sees them roaring upfield, if they pin their ears back and they just want to freelance and come after it, then misdirection could certainly become an issue with Scarlett and from the slot receivers and reverses, things like that. And I think also you said force these guys to make decisions. That's where some of those smash concepts come in the passing game, where you get a DB on an island. Even if he's in a zone, you have a shallow and a deep route that combo on one another. Make him choose his poison. And with the receivers that Florida's got, that could be a key to the football game.
Florida's offense couldn't have asked for a better secondary for for Franks especially to start against, because I tell you what, they got these DBs got less time in action than Franks does. So I really think that this is the perfect storm as far as in the passing game that Florida could have started with, because if you look at Michigan's secondary the last 2 years, it was a completely different story. I mean, this would have been trouble, big trouble.
It's kind of funny. If this game was played late in the season, there's no tell. I mean, with the inexperience in the secondary on both sides, I think this could be a totally different game from what we see in the first game. What we're going to see Saturday. It's just there's so many questions on both sides, and really the secondary that while I think this could be a close smash mouth type of game, with these secondaries, you never know. There could be some big plays just waiting to happen. Let's move. Anything else on the offensive side of the thing, guys? Ball?
Nope. Ready to get to the defense.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
All right. So, Bill, I'll start with you on this one. We'll start with Joey on the offense. How does Florida go about defending quarterback more than likely Wilson Speight here? 9 starts he made that last year where Michigan won. He completed 64.5% of his passes, 2,053 yards, 8.9 yards per attempt. He threw 15 touchdown passes and just 3 interceptions in those 9 wins. His stats for the 3 losses at Iowa, at Ohio State, and versus Florida State in the bowl game. He completed just 55% of his passes for 485 yards, 4.9 yards per attempt. So cut that in half. From what he did when they were winning. He was intercepted 4 times while just throwing 3 touchdowns. We know he injured his shoulder late in the Iowa game, and that contributed. A lot of people say they should have won that Ohio State game anyway. So, what does this Florida defense have to do to make sure Wilton Speight doesn't look better than he really is?
I think this is simple. I think you win on first down. they've got a pretty good back coming back in Chris Evans, who went for about 700 yards last year, averaged 7.5 yards per touch, broke off a lot of big runs in garbage time, but he also had some big ones against FSU. Yeah. I don't think he's a world beater by any means. And, Florida's they're really deep on a defensive end. There's very questionable depth defensive tackle and linebacker at this point. I feel like if they can contain Michigan on first down, put them in bad down and distance situation, it'll allow Florida to pin their ears back, let those defensive ends rush in waves. They can really disrupt the passing game through the pass rush. And just like I talked about with Michigan trying to leave safety help back to help their young DBs, then Florida can do the same. Then you're going to turn loose Chauncey Gardner to prowl around and maybe make some plays, which he's one of my keys to the football game that I'll talk about. But we need to give Sean Davis, Marco Wilson some help back there, not get them in a situation where they have to be thinking a lot about run support and, about being on an island themselves. So win first down, put them in 2nd and 8, 3rd and 9, and then release the hounds.
Yep. David, just like I said about this is a perfect storm for Franks to kind of get his feet wet. I mean, this is a perfect storm for these young DBs to get their feet wet. I mean, look at this Michigan offense. You got a running back sophomore, Chris Evans. Your starting wide receivers are 2 true freshmen, Tariq Black, who was a 4-star, and Donovan Peoples-Jones, who Florida was in the mix for last year, 5-star. And then the tight end. You're replacing the best tight end in Michigan history in Jake Butt with a sophomore in Tyrone Wheatley. And Gator fans might recognize this name, Nick Eubanks. He was another target of Jim McElwain, sophomore, at the tight end spot. So, this is a perfect storm for these DBs as well. And then you got Michigan's O-line, David and Bill. You got 2 seniors on that offensive line, and that's it. The other guys are sophomores with no starts. You got center Patrick Kugler, who's a senior. Then you got your right guard, Michael Owenu, sophomore, Ben Breederson, who's a sophomore at left guard, the right tackle, John Runyon, sophomore, and you got the left tackle, Mason Cole, who's a senior. So, I mean, this offensive line is going to be learning on the fly as well. So I just think with everything that Florida's kind of lacking, I think Michigan either lacks the same or even more so in those areas. The question marks with Florida's defensive backs. Well, Michigan's wide receivers and tight ends got more question marks, guys that never even played before. I think that Florida has more of an advantage on defense against Michigan's offense than Florida does offense against Michigan's defense, if you guys understand what I mean. I think Florida is very much at an advantage against Michigan's offense. I think Michigan's offense just is not going to be very good this year, especially early in the season. I'm not saying what they're going to be by the end of the year. Like you said, David, this team could look completely different. But and not only that, in the offense, David, they don't have a single returning starter on special teams. Kick return, punt return, kicker, punter, long snapper. Everybody is being replaced on special teams for Michigan. So that's big advantage Florida as well. So I'm just looking down the list, Bill and David, at what we just talked about, the defense, and now we're talking about the offense for Michigan. Just Florida's defense outweighs Michigan's offense in pretty much every category. So I really have to say that I like Florida's chances on defense, and I think Florida's going to have a field day with Wilton Speight.
Yeah, I think the offensive line for Michigan, that is going to play a big point. You mentioned the names there, and they're shuffling a lot of those players. There's concern of depth behind those guys too. And Mason Cole, you mentioned playing tackle. He started 13 games at center last year, and he's moving to tackle. But he played there as a freshman and sophomore, and he started 38 straight games. So he's got some experience, but they're shuffling guys along that offensive line. And so we question Florida's offensive line with how much they shuffle, Ivy going out, but Florida's got a little more established there, McCoy and Johnson and Hege now too. So you got Florida's probably more established along their offensive line than what we're seeing from Michigan at this point. But we know their style of ball. If they're going to try and come in, and I really just think try and slam it down Florida's throat. It was kind of the way we saw when they in the bowl game a couple years ago, and the way Arkansas come in last year and able to establish a run game pretty early. I think erase all the names right now on the roster. I want to see this defense just come and play. That's what to me, that's key number one for this defense is, and they mentioned it today in the press conference, and they brought it up before anybody else did. They know this is going to be a tough, hard-fought game, and they need to come ready to play. So I don't care who it is, just come ready to play. That's what I want. A lot of the time it's been the offense that we can say that about. The offensive line's not coming out and firing, but with this Michigan it's been the Florida offense we could say that about, but this game, I think I know what Michigan's offense is going to try to do. We've kind of said how Spade is limited and he's got some young receivers he'll have to count on. I think they're going to try and come in and establish this run, and I just think this Florida front seven just really, really has to be ready for a four-quarter smash mouth type of game, and it's a test of wills, I think, in this game.
Yeah, they're going to mix it up. They're going to come out with some power run looks out of the eye, and you might see some double tights. They're going to some offset eye. They're going to come right at Florida's young defenders. And then other times they're going to run some zone concept runs where they're going to try to catch some of these young linebackers overrunning their gaps like they did at times last year. So Florida's defense is going to have to play sound team football for 4 quarters. But I do want to kind of comment on what Joey was saying here. I mean, people have questioned Florida's offense mightily, and fair enough. But when you look at the returning experience, while, Michigan's got their starting 5 is a little higher rated. I think they got, they got more 4 stars or whatever, and maybe even more experience in the program. I would say almost a half a year on average more than Florida's starting 5. But they only had 3.4 starts on average as a starting 5 or among the starting 5, where Florida's guys average about 5.9 starts in 2016. 22 starts total from their 5 for 36 to Florida. Games played per starter, 7.2 for Michigan, 9 for UF. I mean, and that's with 2 guys who went bell to bell in 13 games between Mason Cole and Bredeson, with one of those doing a position change. The other 3 guys have 1 start between them. So, I'm not exactly scared of them. They are going to come right at Florida. They are going to be a little more veteran group than Florida's group. They are going to be a talented group. But if Florida can toe the line and be disruptive off the edge, I think they've got a fighting chance to really put a good dent in that Michigan offense.
I think Wilton Spate's going to be on his rear end all day, Bill. I really do. I think this offensive line has nothing on Florida's, starting 4 on their defensive line. And this is a game, Bill, where we can talk about rotation too. Florida's defensive line is going to get a lot of the young guys in there to get some time. I think you're going to see a lot of Antonius Clayton in this game, Bill. I really do. I think he's primed and prepped and ready to go, and I would not be surprised to see him have a couple tackles on Saturday. I think with this young offensive line, I think this is the perfect game and the perfect environment, Bill, where you get these guys some time. So when you got to play Tennessee in 2 weeks after that, these guys are ready to rock and roll. I think Florida is just ripe for the picking on this defense right here against Michigan's offense. Wilton Spate lost a security blanket in Jake Butt. Like I said a while ago, Jake Butt is the best tight end in Michigan history statistically. Wilton Spate threw to Jake Butt on 37% of his passes last year. That's huge for one guy. That's huge. And Jake Butt got injured, obviously we know in the game against Florida State in the Orange Bowl last year. But Wilton Spate is losing his security blanket. He's got 2 tight ends right now that are both sophomores and we have never seen them before, and he's got 2 true freshmen wide receivers starting. And I'm not sold on Michigan's offense. And as we just discussed, I think this is a game where Florida can set the tone early. Bill, you just said that they're going to smash mouth it, run it down Florida's throat. But the question is, can they? We don't know. I trust Florida's defensive line and their linebackers over Michigan's defense or Michigan's offensive line.
Yeah, they will come out in some spread looks, some West Coast, passing attacks and stuff like that. It's not. I don't want to make them sound like they're, some old-fashioned team. It's just,
they're a little more than 3 yards in a cloud of dust.
Yeah, I mean they'll come out in radically different looks. I mean they will come out in a 3-yard cloud of dust kind of approach, and then they'll come out radically different. But Josh Emery, one of our followers at MMA Josh, mentioned that they had a solid OL, and I think it's worth mentioning. In kind of a respectful disagreement with that, Nick Bumgardner, who covers Michigan football for the Detroit Free Press, wrote that, they did pave the way for 249 yards per game in the run game last year and 38 touchdowns. But he says the only problem is only one of those wins came against a top 40 rush defense, and that was Wisconsin. And the other 3 times they played top 40 rushing defenses, that was number 19, 21, and 45. Michigan only averaged 92.7 yards on the ground and only 2.4 yards a carry. Ooh. So I'm not really sure that they've got what it takes in the ground game to really get established against Florida. I think the only way they really do is if Florida doesn't play with good gap integrity and they start freelancing. If the linebackers do that on some of those power and zone attacks, that they're going to come at them early in the game, that's when you can see big plays happen.
Yeah, and 2 players I look at there, you already mentioned Chris Evans, but in the Orange Bowl against FSU, 8 carries, 49 yards, and he had a 30-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter late in that game, and he averaged, like you said, nearly 7 yards per carry, 742 all-purpose yards, and scored 4 touchdowns last year. But they'll even push him out as a slot receiver, so, Florida will have to look out, from there. So there's certain things that we're talking about they'll do different. They won't line up 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I think they're a power team first, but they'll use their running backs as receivers and the other way around. Eddie McDoom is another player I'm thinking looking out for. He's the probably most dynamic of the group. He had 219 all-purpose yards last year, but 160 of them were rushing attempts, and he's a receiver, so he'll be used more in the slot this year as well. But I think he's a guy that he was being recruited heavily by Florida two years ago. So those are 2 guys I think, Chris Evans and McDoom, that maybe not get a lot of talking about so far, but 2 guys I think Florida may need to watch out for.
And Jim Harbaugh loves the play action. Bill and David loves the play action. So that's one thing that Florida is definitely going to have to be ready for, especially early in the game. Listen, don't be surprised if the first play of the game for Michigan on offense is a play action deep pass.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. And I should have mentioned that myself. And that's why he wants to establish this run game. Other than the fact that they've been very good at the run game at times, is to set up those play action. And I hate to keep going back to this, but this could very well be the game where the winner is the one who can dictate what the defense does and expose some young DBs. If Florida's allowed to sit back, if they can contain the run with their 4-2-5 or 4-3 looks like Randy Shannon likes to run, then it's going to make it a lot easier to protect Marco Wilson when he's out there, or Sean Davis, whoever it is that's young in the secondary.
Yep, first play of the big game, Bill and David. I'm calling it right now for Michigan's offense. Play action, deep pass. I don't know if it's going to be complete or not, but I think
CeCe Jefferson comes around the edge and boom, there we go.
Yeah, that very well could. That very well could. But Michigan, just as much as Feleipe Franks is going to be able to test this young secondary for Michigan. You don't think Jim Harbaugh's licking his lips against this secondary?
Yeah. Quick question I just thought of in my head before I forget it. If you're Florida and you win the toss, what do you do?
Oh, Jim Harbaugh or Jim McElwain takes it every time. He does. That he believes in.
What would you do?
I'd take the ball. I'd want to set the tone on offense for Florida. I want to go down and score a touchdown right away because I trust my defense. I trust my defense enough to be able to hold serve.
Yeah, you're on the road. Get some good early momentum going.
But see, that's one thing I do like about McElwain. We all grew up at Springer, and that was his kind of thought of mine too. So I think all of us, we were kind of raised for Florida football. You win the toss, you take the ball. So I think I lean that way too. So and here's another thing, but we've seen it in the last few games is how this Florida offense comes out and is ready to go early in the game. So, of course, it didn't work out with Florida State, but you got all the way down to the goal line. And Alabama, you marched right down on them. That I just think if you win the toss, I completely agree. You can go forward and try and get some points on the board. So I got a lot of Twitter questions if we want to get to, guys. But before I hit those, I'm pretty sure both of you guys have something else to dive into before we hit those.
I just wanted to get into our fun stuff that we kind of dove into a little earlier today, David, when we brought up the superstition. I just wanted to bring up some of the things. I don't know, Bill, you kind of missed this. I don't know if you were sleeping earlier today, but David brought up a point about superstitions about uniforms and fans, believe that uniforms cause wins or losses. Well, I had a little fun with it earlier, and I asked our followers, and David retweeted and asked some people, what's the funniest superstition that you've ever done, that you thought helped your team win a game? And I I got some good ones. Oh man, there's one guy said that he blacks out at a bar every single game, every game. Another guy said that he irons his clothes He literally will iron his clothes for an entire game while the game's on. Patrick Smith said, I have a Gator shower curtain that I take down and I lay over the couch and I sit on it during big games. I thought that one was actually really funny because I could see somebody doing something like that. And
a lot of this comes from because, of course, in case you missed it, Florida and Michigan both announced special uniforms for the game. So Florida in all blue and Michigan in all maize, which is yellow.
Yes, and this is actually my favorite. Caleb Batchelor tells us, my family runs around inside of the house in a circle after each touchdown. And on the Callaway touchdown against Tennessee, we ran around twice. I like that. I said it's good exercise. So, but thanks for all the responses. I just thought that had a little fun for a little while on Twitter earlier with that. Some, people said that they park in the same spot. So I thought some of these were fun, but I wanted to bring that up for a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I mentioned that because, some of that comes about with, does the uniform affect the way a team performs and if they win or lose? And I used to be that superstitious growing up and stuff, but the older I get, the further away I get from that. So
I watched an entire second half in the kitchen, David. We were losing to Florida State. It was in Tallahassee in 2012. Do you remember that game when we were 11-1 that year? We were 10-1 going into that game. That was the game that EJ Manuel got knocked out. We were losing that game. I went into the kitchen at halftime, and we came back and dominated the second half and won the game, and I didn't leave the kitchen. I stood in the kitchen the entire second half. True story.
Before we dive back into more football, Bill, you got any superstitious theories?
Nah, man, I'm usually just trying to work or get home from work, so I miss a lot of football games, but I do the best I can.
Yeah, we know you catch up. You catch up though, so.
Yeah, I'm kind of a Nosferatu, and I work at night so much, so sometimes I'm sleeping.
So will you stay on Twitter during the games if you have to work?
No, I can't do that. But if I'm home, I definitely will.
For sure. So I did. Go ahead, Bill. I think you had something before I dive into these Twitter questions here. Some breakdown from you.
Well, yeah, just one other thing. You got to be thinking about kind of like what you were talking about. With Franks just giving you that upside to hit those deep throws earlier in the show. Mac really has to find, and I'm going to go back to my buzzword, and that's that competitive advantage. You don't want to ask your guys to just dink and dunk and just sustain these long drives against a disruptive front four. You got to find plays on both sides of the ball, ways to affect the football and assert your team's will. And one way I think they could do that on defense, there's one guy that stands out to me is just that oozes playmaking ability and has the ability to change the game at any moment, and that's Chauncey Gardner. And if I'm McElwain and if I'm Randy Shannon, and I know Shannon doesn't always like to get too willy-nilly on his defensive schemes, but I would really use him a little bit like Harbaugh and Don Brown used their Viper back, and like they used Jabril Peppers last year. I want to see him moving around. I want to see him coming on blitzes. I want to see him up as a third linebacker. I want to see him, giving some deep third coverage as a safety. I want to see him moving out the corner on their best wide receiver at times. I want him all over the field. Any way they feel like they can get him in position to touch the football, I want him to do it.
I want him to start at safety.
Sounds like you might.
Yeah. Actually, I would not be surprised if he's your starting strong safety.
It's gonna be interesting back there. They got three guys they can put there, and I probably feel pretty comfortable with by now. So I think if you are looking at a play action or some type of trickeration from Michigan early, you probably stick with Gardner and Washington back there. But I think we'll see. I think we'll definitely see some rotation back there.
My guy Joseph, Bill.
Yeah, don't. As the 24/7 board says, don't sleep on Putu.
That's right. Yeah, it's funny.
Bill's already been sleeping on him.
Well, kind of getting back just to a serious note on that, mental mistakes by DBs are going to be one of the big things. And conversely, maybe mental mistakes by quarterbacks if they're under pressure. That might be the two things to watch for in this game. Does it go into wide receivers running wild down the field because a DB made a mistake, a bit on a double move or was out of position? Or does a quarterback start getting harassed and tossing balls up for interceptions, which could happen either way in this football game?
Yeah. I think before I dive into these questions, that just made me think here. With Putu out as right now the other cornerback opposite of Duke Dawson, do you think it's God? I mean, we haven't heard anything too negative out of camp as far as that goes. So do you think it is Putu elevating his game a little bit, or do you still think maybe these freshmen aren't quite ready to take over a starting cornerback role?
Oh, I think it's Putu elevating his game. I told Bill that I saw when he played last year, he had some flashes of being pretty good, especially on special teams. I mean, he's a hawk, man. He's looking for contact at all times. And when he got his chance last year, I saw him make some pretty good plays. Arkansas really wanted him bad for a reason. McElwain came in at the 11th hour and stole him away from Bielema. So, I mean, he was definitely sought after for a reason. I mean, he had a pretty good JUCO career.
I'm going to withhold judgment. We'll see. I like the frame. I think it'll be good in run support. And I really am curious to see how much zone versus man Florida runs this year. How much help they give him with the safeties. Yeah. So we'll see. I don't know that he's a guy that's going to turn and run and be a shutdown corner by any means, or even – and I know that's kind of like the unicorn of football. There's not many of those really, but we'll see. I just want to see it first.
All right, let's get to these Twitter questions. Plenty of ones that were sent to us when we threw the tweet out there for some questions for this Florida versus Michigan game and for the season a little bit. So Fourth and Jordan sent this to us, and we've kind of already hit on this, but if there's anything else you want to add to this, how does Florida win the line of scrimmage battle against the Michigan defensive line? Like as I mentioned, I think keeping them off balance, sweeps, reverses, don't run right at them. I think quickly there, I just think that's one way you can keep this Michigan defensive line at a disadvantage against the Florida offensive line.
Yeah, and again, I agree to a point. If they're roaring upfield, if they're not playing with playing good assignment football, then yes. But otherwise, I think you've got an undersized mismatch with that 280 Hurst kid, and I don't like letting him, run laterally and create problems with penetration. I want to run right at him. I don't think that they got a lot of size out of Chase Winovich, who would be their, I think, 245-pound defensive end that starts. I think I want north and south football.
I think you got to double team Rashawn Gary. He's 6'5", 300 pounds. I think you got to double team him. I could see, Wani Taylor double teaming him with maybe Fred Johnson or Tyler Jordan. Tyler Jordan, from all accounts, has had a great camp. We look for him to play a lot this year. And I think Tyler Jordan and Wani Taylor's size, I mean, they can do some damage.
Yeah, this is a stiff test for our young offensive line here. I mean, you got Brett Hege starting for his first game as a redshirt freshman against some very good defensive tackles. Man, it makes me nervous. But let's see if they can take that step.
Yep, for sure. Chaz K, Chaz Kells, which position group do you think goes a long way in determining the outcome on Saturday? I know we kind of already hit that one too, but if you could pick one position group, which one would it be?
Quarterback. Enough said. I don't need to say anything else.
Okay. Yep.
And I guess it's obvious I'm going offensive line.
Yeah.
Weapon X, he was one of our Michigan friends that stopped by, and he actually gave us some really good conversation after the poll that we'll mention later in the show. He said he thought Michigan would win in a close contest and control the lines of scrimmage, particularly on defense. And, and if Florida can't block them, that may be very well what happens. However, as Tad Criswell said, U.S. offensive line is supposed to be improved. So I think that's where it hinges right there, man.
Yep. For me, I'm picking the Florida defensive line. Like I said, I want to see those guys come out and play and establish, in the trenches, and establish their game. It doesn't matter who you're playing on the other side, you play well. So that's kind of what I want to see. And I think if the Florida defensive line can control the game and not let this Michigan run game go crazy, I'm not a big believer in Wilson Speight can beat you. So that's where I'm going with that one. So Jordan Russell at J. Russell, which new secondary will be tested more in the first game, Florida's or Michigan? We kind of already answered that one too, right?
Could you repeat that there, Dave?
Which young secondary will be tested more in the game, Florida or Michigan?
Oh, I think Michigan's. I think Florida's got some decent returning experience back there. I mean, if Nick Washington's ready to go, which I haven't heard the latest status on him. I mean, he was
good to go. It's good to go.
He's a part-time starter last year, played in 10 games. Chauncey Gardner played in all 13, started 3, led the team in interceptions. I mean, Duke Dawson started 7 games, played in all 12, and is a second-team All-American, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, they're young in spots, but there's some serious veteran presence back there.
Yeah. All right.
Michigan's.
Go ahead, Joe.
Michigan's defensive backs will be tested. I like I said, me and you agreed earlier. I think Florida comes out throwing the ball.
They may have one start in their whole secondary from last year. One.
Yes.
Yeah. Did bounce. This is a really good one. Do you think we will be risky at points in the game and go for it on 4th down? If so, does it have to be a specific quarterback at the helm to do that? So Will Miles, joined us. He's joining us here on Wednesdays now on Gators Breakdown, and he wrote an article about how Florida is good in close games, and a lot of that is going for it on 4th down and being successful. So do you think in the first game of the season, and this being a big game, do you still think we see that strategy from Jim McElwain?
I hope so. It's not the time. I mean, I wanted to be patient in the overall scheme of things, but I think that I like going for it on 4th down when it's a reasonable down and distance. I think you got a good shot at it most of the time, and why not? Not here to get a participation ribbon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the aggressiveness that Jim McElwain, shows. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, as much as 4th downs as he won for, there's been some important ones that we haven't made. We can go back to that one against Florida State last year, but I really, really, really like going for it on 4th down, especially when you're in the other team's territory. But the thing about it is, up until last year, Florida didn't have a kicker. Eddie P can hit from 60, 65 out comfortably, kind of, especially in a dome, in the inside that he's going to be in on Saturday. So, Bill, I mean, if it's a close game, I mean, do you even take a chance when you're very confident that Eddie P indoors, especially, can probably hit a 65-yarder at AT&T Stadium on Saturday?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying like every time, and there's a time and a place. It just depends on the situation. And Mac's a professional football coach and knows when that is. But you're absolutely right. I mean, Eddie Pinheiro adds a dynamic to the football game and to the attack where I fully expect him to get 2 or 3 field goals in this game. And that's in the prediction score I've got. I had to factor that in. Yeah. Probably some long ones.
And I'll hit the second part of that question to be a specific quarterback. If they're going for it on 4th down, it's 4th and short, 4th and 1, 4th and 2, maybe 4th and 3. That may be where we see Malik Zaire come in and get those tough run yards. Give that defense something, that Michigan defensive line, again, something to think about. It's not necessarily take it and hand it off if you're Franks or Del Rio, but if you're Zaire, you can fake it, you can take it. I think that's one place we can really see him excel.
Yeah, that's a good
Not
point.
only that, goal line packages too, David. Zaire is going to be the quarterback, especially if Florida's inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah, I'll feel much more comfortable about this game if Eddie Pinheiro is kicking his field goals from farther out, and when they get to the red zone, they're taking advantage of those opportunities.
For sure. Good question here from Gator Nation 1. Do you think Mac is going to have a short fuse with whoever starts? How many drives before a switch if things aren't good? The way I look at it is it's a slippery slope if it's Feleipe Franks and you take him out for Luke Del Rio. Does his confidence get shot here? I think if it's Del Rio and it's the opposite way and you're inserting Franks, I'm not sure that affects Del Rio as much as him being, the experienced guy and already being through a season. But I'm not sure. It may be a slippery slope if Franks get the start. If everything's not going well in the 3rd or 4th drive of the game, you switch him out for it. But unless it's planned. Now, if it's planned and they knew all along, okay, then I think that the result of that is probably a little different. But if it's not going well and you take him out for Luke Del Rio, then I would wonder if that would have an effect as the season wears on.
I hope McElwain just trolls everybody in the fan base, and Del Rio, Zaire, and Franks all come out on the first series, and
Tony too,
and Tony. Yeah, I mean, I just want to see it. I just want to see him troll everybody, and then whoever breaks the huddle, like towards center, like everybody's mind is just blown.
The Will Muschamp, Jacoby Brissett, Jeff Driscoll thing.
Yeah, to kind of answer that question, I think if you think about the psyche of not only, of course, the fans, but more importantly, the team and the quarterbacks, it's a big difference. If you put Franks out there, and he struggles, and you pull that kid in his first game in a tough situation, oof, that'll hurt. And he's still developing quarterback. He's a guy you really, and I know Matt Corral's out there, but right now Franks is your hope for the future.
This isn't Northern Colorado, Bill. I mean, you got to pull him if he's stinking up. This is an important game.
Yeah, if he comes out and throws 3 picks in the first half, sure.
Oh yeah. You got to pull him. Yeah.
Well, remember, he said short fuse, and so no, I don't think you can do that with Franks. Now, if you feel like you're in a situation early where Del Rio's just not getting it done, and you don't feel like he has the physical tools, maybe that arm is not quite the cannon that he professes himself to possess, but then maybe you feel like Franks can give you that spark and big play ability. I think that's more feasible, and I think it's just a probably a little better narrative for everyone to digest inside the program.
I think this question only applies to Del Rio and Franks, because Zaire is going to be heavily involved in the offense all year. I mean, he's in the plans. He's going to play quarterback a lot this year. I mean, he didn't come here to sit on the bench. I mean, let's just be honest. He's going to play a lot this year. Whether he starts or he only plays, 10 snaps a game, he's still going to play. So I think this applies to Del Rio or Franks, whoever gets a start. I think Franks has to have the longer leash, the longer fuse, because this is his first game. We know Del Rio's ceiling. We kind of seen it. So if Del Rio comes out and stinks up the joint in the first quarter, I think you got to yank him. I think you have to, because the Boo Birds are going to be flying.
For sure. A little bit of prediction here from @Sean Steed here. Will Jordan Scarlett go off or struggle against the Michigan defensive line?
Tough, real tough. I can't even – that's hard to answer. I mean, my heart says I want him to go off. I want him to rush for $130, $140, but I just think Florida's not going to give him a chance to, David, specifically for what we talked about earlier. I think Florida's going to go a 65% pass to run to 35% run in this game, just because of how where their weaknesses are. So I don't think McElwain's going to give Jordan Scarlett a chance to go off, but he could.
Yeah, I just disagree. I think you got to run the football against these guys. I'm sticking to my guts. Run right at them. Hit them in the mouth. But I'm not saying he goes off for 120 yards at this point, because I think that defensive line of Michigan is going to be disruptive at times. I think this is going to be a back-and-forth situation. I think Florida's offense is going to take their lumps at times against this team. I think they just need to contain the damage. But at the same time, Scarlett is a guy who breaks tackles, and you've got a defensive line that likes to run around blocks a little bit. At least I say that's not fair. Hurst likes to disengage and run laterally, and they do like to twist and stunt. So with them moving, that can hurt them. They can open themselves up and take themselves out of the play. And if you put Scarlett on that second level against these guys that have very little experience, I could see him breaking off some runs. So I think it is possible that Scarlett rips off a 30 or 40-yard run in this game.
Yeah, I'm pretty torn too. I don't see it, and I've said it earlier. I just don't see this offensive line yet just gelling enough to be able to give Scarlett the running lanes he needs to bust the big runs. Now, can he give us the 5 and the 6 important yards run? I want to see the short yardage runs. That's what I want to see. I want to see the conversion runs, keep the drive going runs. I don't have to see Jordan Scarlett run for 120 yards in this game. It can be 60 yards, but convert 5 or 6 third downs, and much like the LSU game last year. If he can come out in the second half and run for 60 yards, more than likely that's a good thing there. So, I don't expect him to go off, but I do expect him to be an important role in the offense and keeping the offense on the field.
Yeah, I want to see him up around that 90 mark at least, man. I'm not real comfortable if they can't get more than 60 yards out of the primary back.
Yeah, I was saying 60 yards in the second half. You're right. Oh, okay. 30 yards in the first, and you come out in the second and can double that, then
sure.
I think it's good.
I could see that.
I think because both, Joey and I both think we see more than you, but I think we see early passing, so that probably plays into that a little bit. So
I'm ready to eat crow, man. If they come out and just completely say, let's just throw the ball, I will eat crow, and I hope it works.
Well, part of it, you're right, is how Michigan lines up. So, who knows?
Yeah, now, and one thing to watch out for, and I want to kind of tell our listeners this, that I've watched quite a bit of Michigan's tape from last year, and it seems like Don Brown, the defense coordinator, where he really likes to get creative and he likes to just throw all kinds of stuff at you, is on those bad down and distances. When he gets you in 2nd and 9, 3rd and 9, or worse than that. You might see zone blitzes. You're going to see 3-3-5. You're going to see just all kinds of exotic blitz pressures. He's just a lot more patient, I think, on the 1st and 10s and the 2nd and 5s. So we'll see. And if Florida can find a way to throw into that, those 4-2-5s nickel looks early in the game, and if they're having success, then Michigan's going to be on their heels because that's their best looks.
For sure. So, guys, it is prediction time. So, for now, we will definitely predict this Michigan game. And then right after that, we will kind of just give the season predictions and how you think the season will play out for the Gators. This is a game that I think we have all kind of been looking forward to for a long time. And it's the biggest opener in Florida history. It's pointing out the special uniforms are being made. It's in Dallas. It's a game that Jim McElwain, I think, I'm not going to say has to win, but it goes a long way if he does. Everything besides the off-the-field issues, recruiting is kind of on a high point right now. This Michigan game's first game of the season. You win this game, I think it keeps all that positive mojo going for these Gators. So, Joey, I'll throw it at you first, man. What you got with this Florida-Michigan game in Dallas?
Well, Florida has never beaten Michigan before, David. Florida lost to Michigan in the 2003 Outback Bowl. Florida lost to Michigan in the 2007 Capital One Bowl. And Florida lost to Michigan at the Buffalo Wild Wings Citrus Bowl in 2015, as we know. Florida breaks the streak here. They do. I think Florida's just a better team than Michigan is. I've been saying it all summer. Nothing's changed. I don't care if there was 12 players suspended, 7 players suspended. Only one of those guys actually matters. And I think it was the one position where Florida could afford a loss at the one position where Florida could avoid a loss or could use a loss, and it was at the wide receiver position. So is Callaway going to hurt? Yeah, he probably hurt a little bit. But as far as the other guys, not really a big deal. I think Florida's good in every area except obviously the quarterback position. We just don't know. It's not about being good or bad. It's just a question mark. I just think Florida, minus maybe the defensive line and the offensive line, because we don't know either. I think Florida's just better at every position against Michigan outside of that. So I'm going to say Florida wins, and I'm going to say Florida actually wins decisively. I'm going to say Florida wins by 2 touchdowns, and I think Florida pulls away in the second half. I think it's close in the going into halftime. It might even be tied. Maybe Michigan's up by 3, but I think the second half, I think Florida gets a couple of touchdowns in the second half, and Florida wins 31-17.
31-17 for Joe. Bill, your first time doing predictions with us, so this is the first time you've been in season with us. So it's going to be fun. We'll do this every week, of course, but big game, and I think you, like me, have been going back and forth a pretty good bit on this one.
I have. I was struggling even at the start of the show. I've been really just kind of hand-wringing over this because this could go either way. It's easy to see either one of these quarterbacks self-destructing or becoming a hero. It's easy to see either one of these defenses getting exposed with their lack of experience and perhaps lack of depth in Florida's case. And these offensive lines on both sides have a lot of questions to answer. I want to thank everyone from Florida and Michigan that responded to my poll. We had 7,000 responses on the poll that I threw out. Michigan fans, even the Florida State fans are kind of chiming in. The results were like 70% in the favor of Michigan, but that was not all because of Michigan. There's a lot of Florida fans that aren't sure about this game. And just to mention a few of these before I give you this, Sonny Crockett, our friend at Sonny Crockett, predicted 21-10 by the Gators. He cited the fact that Michigan lost so many starters. Ron Noel said the same thing, and he said it'll come down to quarterback play. Jason Keisel, who I believe is a Michigan fan, questioned Ivy's injury, or we think there may be a little bit of a problem with Ivy. And then at Sean Gilbert said that, again, the starters loss from Michigan would be a factor. Haven't thought about all that. I think this game is going to feature, like I said, quarterbacks who have the potential to win or lose the game for their team. But really, I think it's going to come down to the offensive lines, how they hold up. I do think that Florida Oh, I'm giving him some credit here. I think Florida's going to pull it out 27-20. And I think that Pinheiro has a couple of field goals. I think one of those touchdowns comes from a special teams or defensive return. It's easy to see Chauncey Gardner housing a ball thrown by Michigan's quarterback there. But I caution you guys, this could go either way.
Yep, I think I go both ways as well. I started out, for a month or so before that, as well as a Florida win, and I've kind of went back a little bit. Off-field trouble, of course, Florida's quarterback issues. I was like, okay, now I'm kind of creeping back toward the Michigan side of things or whatever. But probably within the last couple of days, I found myself thinking, Florida can pull this one out. And doing this episode has kind of made me feel that way too. Doing some research, even diving deeper into Michigan a little bit, diving deeper into Florida a little bit more as well. And it's just I think Florida's defensive line. I think Florida's defensive line and linebackers, I think the front seven really controls this game for the Gators. I don't see Michigan being able to run the ball like they would want to. I don't, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not afraid of Wilson Speight. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he's better than what he gets credit for. I just don't see him being able to do much against the Florida secondary when he has to. So I do lean toward Florida. I'll say 24-20 for the Gators. I think it's a low-score affair. I do think there's, like Bill, I do think there's a big play somewhere along the way that we may not expect. I think Florida's defensive line, and Joey mentioned, and I kind of joked, they may open out with play action, but CeCe Jefferson comes around and gets the ball. Maybe a hit, sack, fumble early in the game, sets up an easy score for the Gators. I think Florida gets up, not with a big score, but I think Florida scores first here and just kind of controls the tempo of the game a little bit with their defense. So I do look for Florida to score early, kind of control the tempo, and like I said, Gators 24-20. So that would start all of us having the Gators start 1-0, and before we sign off here, kind of get some season predictions from you guys too of a final record for Florida, potential losses, maybe the biggest win, and we'll sign off after that one. So Joe, I'll go back with you. You got them 1-0. How did the Gators finish?
Well, I want to piggyback off of what Bill said about his poll and Michigan fans. I messaged Bill earlier. Bill, I just want to say I got your back. And Twitter is written in ink, not pencil. You can't erase it. So those individuals better be prepared to answer for some of the things they were saying to you, because I screenshotted every single person that had something negative to say, and I will be coming on Saturday night. So if you tweeted at Real B Sykes, you're a Michigan fan or a Florida State fan, and you had something negative to say or something mean or nasty or hurtful, you're going to get a visit from Santa Claus on Saturday night with a present in your stocking in the form of a Twitter retweet. And it's screenshotted, so you can't delete it, folks. I might get some blocks on Saturday night. Just saying. But with that said, I am friends with Fred Siegel, who is Old Takes Exposed. Yes, he taught me some tricks of the trade, so just want to throw that out there. No, Gators start 1-0. David, I think this is a tone setter for the season. You got Northern Colorado the week after. Gators got Tennessee at home. We'll be there, David. You and I will be at that game, and we'll be signing autographs. Bill, you coming to sign autographs too?
I didn't know anybody wanted my autograph.
they want yours more than ours, man. You're the 5-star nerd. So, but no, we'll be at that game. That's going to be a revenge game. I think Florida gets that game. And then right after that, David, is that game I talked to you about at Kentucky. I got that game circled. That game in Lexington. Kentucky hasn't lost or hasn't beaten Florida in 30 years. 30 years is a long time. And I fear Florida's actually going to drop that game. I really do. I got Florida losing to Kentucky. I got Florida losing to Georgia this year too. I do. I think I don't know, something inside of me. My gut says Florida's losing to Georgia, and I got Florida going. I got Florida going 9-3 this year, David. And I think I can't say where the other loss is going to come, but it's going to come somewhere along the way. But I got Florida going 9-3, and I have Florida possibly sneaking into the SEC championship game. Maybe Georgia has that third loss as well. I don't know, but I have Florida at 9-3 this year. But 10-2, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think 10-2 is the ceiling for Florida right now until I see something that shows me otherwise. So I got the Gators at 9-3 this year, and I give them a 50-50 shot of still going to Atlanta at 9-3.
Well, yeah. Before Bill jumps in for that one, I guess you said Florida 9-3, Kentucky and Georgia, so that would be 2 conference losses.
Yeah, I just don't know where the third one's going to come because I have Florida beating Florida State this year at home. I'm sorry, I think none of these guys on this roster have ever beaten Florida State, and I think this is just one of those games like the Tennessee game last year where the seniors and juniors just wanted too much. So I have Florida beating Florida State at the end of the year, no matter what Florida's record is. I think that game just means too much to these guys, and it's at the Swamp. That place is going to be rocking, David. You know how it's going to be, especially if Florida's in the hunt at that time. You know, Florida's got 1 loss going into that game. That game's going to be a nut house. So,
yeah. It'd be tough to get to Atlanta with 3 conference losses and one of them being to Georgia, though. So that's.
In the SEC East, David, are we really going to say?
But then Georgia would have to have 4 losses.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, I mean, it's tough.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So I'll let Bill go, but I'm in kind of the same boat there. So.
Well, I'm not going to get into specifics about where these losses are coming from, but I'm going to tell you right now, this Michigan game's a tone setter. It is a serious tone setter for this program. This is year 3 under McElwain. There's a lot of debating that's gone on for the last few years about the direction of the program because of McElwain's recruiting and his development of players and the quarterback situation, and I can win with my dog and all this other stuff. It has not changed from what we talked about earlier in the year. It's time to show a functional offense. I'm not going to judge this team by 1 loss. I think right now the safe bet is that they're a 3-loss team. But get back to me after Saturday, and we're going to have a different discussion. We're going to learn a lot about where this program is at. It's time for this offensive line to show that they care about their coach. It's time for these players to start caring about the coach and the program and not just saying that and then going out and getting cited for marijuana. It's time for this program to take the next step. And if they win, this recruiting momentum is going to start to steamroll. Mm-hmm. National attention is going to circle around McElwain, and he's going to have won up Jim Harbaugh and all his booger eating and all his tirades and his antics. And Florida is going to be center stage in national attention. But if they lose, it sets up a huge Tennessee game in 2 weeks. So I'm going to say 3 losses for now. I'm going to say they probably still win the East, but let's have another discussion after this week.
Well, and David, I want to say a caveat with my 3 losses, okay? If Florida makes it past the Kentucky game undefeated and makes it through September undefeated, the sky's the limit for this team, David, because I don't see LSU beating Florida at home. I think LSU is very overrated. Texas A&M, I think Kevin Sumlin, we talked before, is on his way out. I think Florida wins that game decisively. So if Florida's undefeated going into October 1st, David, I really think that Florida very well could go 11-1 this year and be in the college football playoff.
Yeah, sounds good. And I'll quickly get mine right into here before Bill has to go. I'm the same way, depending on the Michigan game here. I got 10-2, 9-3. Beat Michigan. I think it's a 10-2 type season. Lose to Michigan, 9-3 here. For some reason, I can't put my finger on it. Tennessee game scares me. I have no idea why. That's the one game I point to where I'm not going to pick a loss, but for some reason that game just I don't know why. Like I said, for logically, strategically speaking, I would have to pick Florida, but for some reason, look, I mean, it's hard to pick where Florida is going to lose. When you're a fan of a team, it's hard to pick where your team is going to lose. So more than likely, Florida will lose 2 or 3 games this year. Hopefully they exceed expectations, but final prediction, I already picked them to beat Michigan, so 10-2 for the Gators there, and representing the East once again in Atlanta against Alabama. So one quick thing before we go, I know Bill has to go, so anything else? I know you guys, we're looking forward to being with you throughout the season, so it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, I can't wait, man. It's going to be a fun season.
Happy 1-year anniversary Gators breakdown.
That is right.
For me and David, yes. David and I started doing this together a year ago, the Monday before the opener last year. So
For sure. So later this week, I'll have Steve Deese on with Will Miles and I from the Michigan podcast. He'll jump in and join us and go there, and we'll get the enemy side of things for this game. So for Bill, for Joey, I'm Dave. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.
Chomp chomp.